You're only wasting your time if you're wasting your time.
If
There's
you're
gifts in everything. When given the right information, people can make great decisions. And what we realize is they didn't have the information. I'm telling you right now, as a guy who sees a lot of financials and a lot of businesses,
Mhm.
most companies that you think are profitable because they're a $20, $30 million business are not. Revenue is not an indicator of a good business by any stretch of means at all. And you
Yeah.
might be able to run a $5 million business and make a lot more money than you can a $20 million business. Most problems can be cured by systems and processes, not
Mhm.
people. It's systems and
Right.
processes first, people to run the system and process. If you're looking down your payroll and you have a lot of family members on there, you might want to consider, are they really the people that are best suited for my position? The good to great, and I would say somewhere between before you're even good, the one trait you have to have, in my opinion, is you have to have some humility. You have to know that you don't know everything. You have to know what you don't know, be comfortable with that, be willing to ask for help, be willing to accept help. The people that I see that are good and have all the opportunity in the world, but
Mhm.
never capitalize on it or worse, get hurt, are the ones that are afraid to be honest and open about what they
Mhm.
know and what they don't know. Or they're fearful that they're going to look a certain way that's typically negative because of something that actually is true. Margin is the price you are paid less all of your project related costs. That's your margin. Let me give you an example.
Great. So, hello, everyone. We're so excited to have another guest today on the GovCon Giants podcast. So, today we have a friend of ours who's been around GovCon for a little while now. And so, I'd like to have him introduce himself and his company, and we'll go from there today.
Thanks, Randy. I appreciate it. So, my name is Scott Peper. I'm the founder and CEO of Mobilization Funding. We are a specialty lender that focuses on the construction space, primarily with commercial contractors and other businesses that could be any kind of government contracting, whether it's manufacturing, fabrication, work in progress, even the delivery of finished goods and materials. We're very accustomed to the government space, both federal government and lots of its different agencies. And we funded and worked with lots of companies there and helped them grow on all those programs. And that is us. We live in Tampa, Florida. That's where our company is located. A lot of us. We also have an office in Beaufort, South Carolina. And I'm excited to talk to you today.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Scott, for introducing yourself and your company. So, I did read that about that fun fact about you and your wife, March 10th, right?
That's right.
The date,
Yes. Look at
an,
you.
an important date for you
It
all.
is.
And that's also the day you launched your book. So, we'll talk about your book here in a little bit. So, I guess I've got 1 year on you. I'm 25 years in. So, we've
Nice.
lots of life experiences, right? The
That's right.
joys of marriage and children, and then being able to do what we do, build a business and help people. So one of the things I wanted to ask, tell me a little bit about your background, because I know I have your bio, and
Mhm.
you have definitely taken a different journey from where you are today, right? You were in the
Yeah.
health industry. So I am very curious about your journey.
Well, I highly recommend people not to take my necessary path. But, you know, it's funny because I think everybody has their own path. I couldn't tell you I came out of high school or whatever and said, oh,
Mhm.
this is exactly what I want to do and how I want
Yep.
to do it. I think a lot of people say, oh, find your passion and, go to something you like. And it's probably good advice. But the truth is I was never passionate about something until I kind of fell into it and became passionate about it. So I think it's trying to find your passion and then create a world around it, whether it's a job or working with people that you like. It's not easy to do. I think you got to try other things. And so, my background, I came out of college. I graduated in upstate. I'm from upstate New York, just south of Albany, New York.
Okay.
And then I went to college out in the Rochester area or Western New York. For those people listening and don't understand New York, there's a lot more to it than just
The
New
New
York
York
City.
City, right?
And upstate is not Westchester County. Upstate is
Mhm.
upstate, like farther, way farther.
Yeah.
And so I grew up in that area. If you know about that area at all, it's got terrible winters. It's freezing cold. And where I went to college, it has what you call lake effect snow. And those giant
Mhm.
Great Lakes, when the weather comes over those, what looks like a snowstorm to on the weather report is usually twice or three times the snowstorm coming across the lake. So I was sick and tired of the winter when I got out. I had an opportunity to come to Florida to work for a food service company. I had a degree in food, hotel, hospitality management with minor in
Oh,
marketing.
okay.
And honestly, why I took that is it sounded interesting after I chose to go play basketball at that school. If you really want to know, that was it.
Okay. 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 All right.
So I didn't have a passion. I knew I wanted to get some kind of college experience. I mostly wanted to continue to play basketball at the time. I was 18. And so that's what I did. Had a great experience, moved to Florida, was in the food service business. I quickly realized that after 6 months, despite liking it and enjoying it,
Uh-huh.
that it was not going to be something I wanted to do long term, for a lot of reasons, financial reasons, the type of business it was, what I had to do, how I was doing it. It was cool, great leadership, and I understood things, but it was not what I wanted to do. And my experience was actually at Disney World feeding the employees. So I worked for Airmark Corporation, who had the contract to feed all the employees there.
Okay.
And I was, after like dressing up in a suit every day, coming in and someone not showing up in the morning to make breakfast, and I'm in the back kitchen at 5:30 in the morning in a suit and my shirt with my tie undone, cooking eggs. I'm like, this sucks. I don't want to do that anymore. So I piggybacked that into sales, and I had a bunch of different sales jobs, gym,
Mhm.
health club memberships, ultimately timeshare sales. And then my
Mhm.
own business was my first bout into entrepreneurship, was with a company that I started and created with a friend of mine called the Wellness Zone. And we were a little before our time. It's a much more
Mhm.
the concept we had was it's very popular now.
Yeah.
One-on-one fitness or group fitness with a combination of all types of health and wellness. And, we worked with a lot of different executives or entrepreneurs that were, and their families, that were looking to get into a fitness routine with a combination of nutrition and health and wellness and different doctor and specialties. And
Mhm.
so we helped organize that, and that was a lot of fun. I met my wife during that time, moved to New York City, came back,
Oh.
and got into medical device sales. So the majority of my background, where I learned a lot, is really, and to give you an idea, I was 24 at the time. So I did a lot of things from, 21 to 24, 25. But I
Uh-huh.
got into medical device sales in 2004, and came in Florida, moved in Tampa, and I worked for two companies really: Angiodynamics, which is a peripheral vascular company, and Stryker Orthopedics. A lot of people probably heard of that, and that was with knee and hip implants.
Mhm.
I learned a lot there. I did all different types of sales roles, sales management, sales leadership, contracting, executive leadership, executive management, and had a lot of exposure to all kinds of things in business that really kind of refueled my entrepreneurial spirit. Halfway between those two, though, is when mobilization funding started. In
Okay.
about 2013, we made our first loan. It was really a hobby. It was going to be like a side hustle, as everyone might know,
Yeah,
and
there's our side
that's
hustle.
right. And the side hustle was really going to be just friends of us. We all made a loan, and we were going to help contractors.
Mm.
We had an idea, we saw the solution, had a way to do it. We made a couple loans as a hobby. And then in 2014, about 8 to 10 months later, we realized this was a business opportunity, and there was a real need there, and it was a big need, and we could create a solution around it. And that's how the business and mobilization funding started. And I did double duty for a long time.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right. So,
Yeah.
this is great, a great story because it's true. I'm actually reading a couple different books right now. And of course, everything talks about find your uniqueness, your passion, pursue those things, and so it's good to hear that you don't always start off with that passion burning, know exactly what I'm going to pursue and do, and end up doing that the entire time. Although it's going to ebb and flow, but then you can still end up doing what you're doing now as an entrepreneur and still be successful even later on. So it's an encouragement to those that's listening that feel like I still haven't found my path yet. I know I'm
Mhm.
supposed to be doing something, right, as an entrepreneur, but I still haven't found my path yet. So continue going, right? Keep pushing. You never know where on your journey it's gonna take place.
Yeah, I believe you're always being prepared for something, and
Yeah.
you're being prepared on a path that, is a journey, and you're going to have free will to choose along that path, for the benefit or not of yourself, and sometimes for the efficiency or not of yourself, and sometimes for
Mhm.
the others. But the golden rule I've come to learn over the years, I'm 48, so this has been working now for better part of 25 plus years, is you don't whatever you think you have all figured out is not necessarily always going to be the case. And you have to kind of just lean forward. You never can plan it all the way out. I didn't have a passion for construction finance and commercial subcontractors, but I did have a lot of passion and finance to be in business. I also
Mhm.
knew, watching my dad run a commercial construction business,
Oh.
he was a contractor for my entire life. He was first a laborer, then he created a management position for himself. That company went under. He was forced with with his other partner of his to start their own company. He ran that for the better part of 20 years until he sold it and retired. And he was a commercial glazer with glass and aluminum. I worked all around those construction sites. I
Okay.
knew very well. I just didn't know the finance of it, but it was cool. I always loved construction, always had a passion for it. My father was, a business
Mhm.
owner there. So when the idea came along to me, or with a friend of mine, it was, yeah, you understand construction. Your dad was in
Right.
construction. That didn't
Mhm.
qualify me to make loans to commercial contractors. It didn't qualify me for
Right,
anything.
right.
I just could
Yes.
relate. But the 20 years of business experience in all those different roles, whether it was even in timeshare versus, which a lot of people think timeshare is terrible, and I wouldn't recommend buying one necessarily, but I can tell you what it gave me looking back now, 28 years later. When I sat in front of a husband and a wife for 15 to 16 individual presentations every single week for 3 years, I got a
Mhm.
lot of reps. And I mean a lot of reps. And what did I learn from there? I learned how to listen. I learned what people's
Mhm.
problems are. I learned those 17 people didn't all do the same thing. I learned about all different kinds of businesses. I learned about all kinds of different people's problems, where they like to vacation. I
Mhm.
mean, you learn to communicate. And if you're going to do anything effectively in your life, communication and being understood, being able to inspire, being able to get your point across, make sure you hear and listen. Those are things and skills you need to have, right? I got them from timeshare. I wasn't passionate about timeshare, but I am passionate about communicating.
Right.
And so I didn't sit in those timeshare meetings or any and say to myself, man, I'm going to learn how to be a good communicator now. No, I didn't know any of that. It's just looking back now, I can see it. And then, but I learned a lot in the aspects of at Angie Dynamics and watching, sales and leadership and speaking and communicating with people and leading teams, all things that you need to have if you're going to be an entrepreneur. Those are skills, traits, attributes that you have to cultivate somewhere.
So the moral to the lesson is embrace where you're at because you never know when those skills are going to get employed somewhere else, right?
Yeah,
It could be translated, and every time at every level of our life, we could be transformed, right? If we choose to learn
that's right.
and
You're
grow.
you're only wasting your time if you're wasting your time.
If
There's
you're wasting
gifts,
your
there's
time.
gifts in everything.
Exactly. So I'm glad you actually talked about your dad. I heard a little bit about from your one podcast you did talking about the construction jobs. And you can do everything in between, like you can have every type of position. So that was really insightful to me. I'm like, I never sat down to think about that, but it's true. And so that you can take anything you're doing and probably translate it into the construction world. So that was very insightful, and I appreciate you sharing that. So, with your dad's background, so growing up around construction, how did you even find? So, going back to the beginning of the company, how did you find that person that needed that loan? Like, was it a friend, or y'all both just kind of stumbled? Like, well, how did you even just? Oh, we're just going to loan somebody something, you know?
Yeah, no, I would love to say that's the case, but no, the way it happened was a friend of mine called me one day and said, Scott, your dad was in construction. We got this great idea. I
Hmm.
met this other guy down here because he had moved from New York down to Beaufort, South Carolina. He said, I met this guy in Beaufort, South Carolina. He's got this great idea. He used to be in banking. He used to have this construction company. To give you an idea, now this is 2013, so time frame wise, for not everybody that lived through the recession like you and I did, Randy, 2007, 8, 9, 10, it is a
Yep.
big
Hmm.
difference going on. Well, anyone coming out of that recession and back into construction, there was a whole different playing field. Like if you played on turf before, it's now grass. If it was dirt, it's now turf. I mean, like
Right, right.
things are
Yes.
different.
Uh-huh.
And so one of those biggest differences was bonding capacity, which is certainly pertinent in the federal contracting space. In order to get a bond, it was even harder. The
Mm,
bonding companies and sureties had just gotten absolutely smoked during the recession. They had the biggest losses, of a record decade time period for them.
mhm.
And they were a little skittish coming back out. Like any bonding, insurance, banking company, banks did not want to lend any more money. There was no such thing as mobilization funding anymore. The old days for the contractors or folks that are listening to this, used to sign the contract and get a 10% deposit. Like those days are over, obviously. So that created a big need for contractors to be able to execute work. And so what we had this idea that if we could help fill that void, and a surety agent had been working with one of my original partners who said, you know what, if you guys could just come up with a way to help create this, fill this working capital component, we could write more bonds and these great contractors could do more work. And when I say great contractors, I mean the people that made it through the recession were really the best of the best at what they do. They just were now significantly financially impaired, either because of getting through the recession or because banks didn't want to lend money anymore to commercial construction.
Right.
And there was just not access to capital, and the contracting requirements changed. And so it created an opportunity for one of those bonding agents to say, I have a client and I want to write this bond. And if you can make a $40,000 loan to this electrical contractor, he can execute this work and we can protect you through this funds control process. And we're like, okay, well, let's try it out. It makes sense. And that's how we made our first loan. And then we found our second loan and our third loan through similar paths and referral patterns. And it was kind of a hobby for the first, 2013, first 8-10 months. And then real business hit in. And when I say real business, I mean like this 11-year journey of mine is no different than a regular entrepreneur. You have your problems, you have your partner buyouts, you have your partner problems, you have your partners who quit, you have partners.
The honeymoon periods. That is over.
The original partner, how I became passionate about this business, aside from just a hobby or a side hustle. I mean, candidly, when I put that first money into that loan, I was like, this is great. I'm going to put some money to work. Somebody else is going to do all the work. I'm going to get paid back, and with some interest, I'm going to keep, selling medical device implants, no big deal. And so what happened though was one of the partners, we had our first problem after about 10 months. It created a lot of stress. Stress creates, opportunity, but it also creates and shows you people's true colors. And sometimes people just don't like the stress and they quit. And that's what happened with one of our main partners. He quit. In the process of quitting, it created a big void. And myself and one of our other partners had to go find these clients that we had these loans out to, because we weren't involved in the day-to-day. And so it was over the course of that next 6 to 12 months of going out, meeting with these clients and asking what they're doing and finding the loan transactions and seeing the contracting work, that I learned the entire business. And what I originally thought was just a poor business, that was a bad idea, was actually a great business and a great idea. It was just poorly executed. And that if we had just gone out and done what we said we were going to do in the manner in which we said we were going to do it, we could actually make these loans to the great folks that are working on these projects and help them. And so we still do today exactly what we set out to do. We just do it in a little bit different way, and making sure we've made the tweaks and adjustments to help. And that's how it all started, really.
Well, very intricate. And you're right. When stress hits and, everything hits the fan, we get to see who our true ride and die partners are with us. So I appreciate you sharing that inside story of how you guys really got going. So let's talk about what you guys do and how you help contractors now, because you focus in on cash flow management. I see you guys have some cash flow management tools and so forth. So you do not only cash flow management, but also you help with, per project funding, et cetera. So can you tell a little bit about the difference between your two services?
Absolutely.
And how they help?
It's actually, we are a lending company. It's our capital. We're the lender. We're not a broker, and we're not a factoring company. And what I mean by that is we really look at what our clients' opportunities are. And I like to call them a revenue cycle. And a revenue cycle is, I have a contract or a purchase order I was just awarded. I have to do A, B, and C and X, Y, and Z before I can turn it into an invoice or a series of invoices to my customer. And then my customer pays me, and that's the end of the revenue cycle. And so along that pathway, there's expenses associated to being able to execute those things and then ultimately get paid by your customer. And so what we are good at doing is looking at what the contractor or customer of ours may be contracted to do in the form of a contractor purchase order, whether it's finished goods or services or construction, whatever it is they do, and then helping them analyze what the costs of their project revenue cycle are, when they have to spend those costs, and then what the cash flow gaps are based on when they get paid. And if it's progress billing or they invoice all at one time, there's different cash flow needs based on customers that they're buying from, their terms. If their customer pays them in 10 days, 30 days, do they get deposits? Do they not? All those different aspects. And then what we do is we build a model that shows where the cash flow gaps are. And then if we can be a source of capital for those cash flow gaps to help them execute. And so all of our loans fit inside the revenue cycle. You can use the dollars when you actually need it, which is before you invoice or get started.
Mhm.
You can use it for all project-related costs, whether it's payroll, materials, equipment, vendors, suppliers, et cetera. And then when you invoice your customer, we're paid back as you are paid back. And so you can now finance your project and your growth utilizing margin on your job instead of having to figure out how to take out this big loan to finance your company to ultimately hit maybe these milestones that you may or may not get on certain timelines, because nobody knows how you're going to grow your business and what customers are going to come in place. But if you can do it contract by contract or customer by customer, it's a lot easier to do. So that is our main product. It's a mobilization funding loan program. Now, why we talk so much about cash flow was really the second pivot point, Randy, in what we do. And the reason I even have a face at all on social media and why we probably even met is because what I realized early on, about 4 or 5 years into doing this, is that we had to figure out what that cash flow cycle looked like if we were really truly going to help a customer execute work and benefit them,
Right.
benefit the project, benefit their customer, and ultimately provide a loan and be repaid. If we just gave people money, anybody can do that, right? But if you get money and you don't know how to use it, or you get money and use it incorrectly, or you get too little, or you get too much, that's a real problem for a business owner. And so if you're helping business owners who otherwise don't have normal superb financial sophistication and they don't have access to capital, and you're now giving them access to capital to be able to go do that in sums of dollars that are much larger than they might have otherwise been able to do. It's really your job to make sure that it's used properly, not just for you, meaning not just for me,
Right.
but for everyone,
Right. But yeah.
the benefit of everyone. And yes, it does benefit us to do that. But if it benefits us at the same time, it benefits our client and our client's customer, well, now you're really helping everybody. Now you're actually making things great for everybody, and you're putting controls in place that helps our customer, helps them look great to their customer, and provides them education and tools. And so we built this cash flow tool for our own selves in underwriting to determine these things. And as we started to show them to customers, hey, we can make this loan. Here's how much you need and why. And a lot of times customers think they need more money than they actually do. And so when we would show them and show them where and how, the amazing thing happened. And it was all of a sudden these light bulbs would go off and they would say, oh, you know what? Okay, well, never mind. I can go buy from this supplier instead. I was actually just trying to save money from that supplier. I was getting a discount of $5,000, but you know what? It doesn't make any sense to order from them because it's better for me to have 45-day terms from them. Or I'm going to use contract labor now instead of sub labor, or, you know, I'm going to order from that material person instead of this one. And so they had all this information. And what we learned was when given the right information, people can make great decisions. And what we realized is they didn't have the information. So I said, let's give out this tool for free. Let's start educating and talking to people about cash flow and business and who's our typical customers. Well, what keeps them up at night? What makes them nervous and scared? Let's educate on that. Those are the things we know. We know those kind of things. And so we just started providing all of that information and content and education out there to help our potential network or world that we thought we could serve and give first with no expectation of anything in return, and see how that could help us in return ultimately. And it was that pivot point right in the beginning, at the end of 2019, beginning of 2020, coincidentally, it happened to be right before COVID, that our entire business changed. The people that would call us, the types of customers we help, There's this like broker world out there that really preys on these same type of clients that we usually help, that don't serve them well and hurt them. And they used to call us with their clients, and we just got rid of all that. And we now had this great network of people that we were helping educate to learn from.
Oh, lovely. Oh, that is fantastic. Because what it boiled down to, all of what you're helping them do, they really can now create a strategy, of laying it all out linearly, seeing what the moving parts is, like almost like playing chess now. Like they could see the board, clearly. So
Yep.
you mentioned, some of the things that keep your clients up at night, and so forth. So first of all, normally how large are these companies that's coming to you?
So our typical customers are anywhere between just at $1 million or about to be. They've been around 2 years, maybe sometimes a little less. Maybe they have a lot of experience. Maybe they haven't been, their business hasn't been around 2 years, but they have been in the business that they are in for someone else, like working. They understand it. They know it for many years.
Mm-hmm.
A typical revenue of our customer is anywhere between $1 million up to $30 million. I would say our customers that really are fitting us perfectly are probably in that $1 million to $2 million, and between $1 million, $2 million to $10 million. They have a back office. They understand what they're doing. They have people in place that do the work. They have people in place that manage the books, and they're trying to grow, and they have done what they know what they're doing. They have lots of opportunity in front of them, but they're not able to capitalize on it, because that's when you actually need the cash. And so we're able to help provide them the working capital they need to execute the new work. And they're on a growth trajectory that, even though they might have bank financing in place, like a traditional line of credit or a SBA loan,
Mm-hmm.
they can't get any other funds that are equipped enough money to actually capitalize on the growth. Good example. You and I own a business, Randy, and we're fighting to get into the big shop or big store or big customer, whatever it may be. And you walk in one day and you get a big purchase order from Dick's Sporting Goods. And you're like, look, Scott, our pens, we're not selling them to just the local pro shop, golf courses anymore. And Dick's wants to put these in 500 stores, and it's $1 million PO. And you and I are high-fiving, and all of a sudden we're like, uh-oh, how are we going to pay for
this?
it?
Exactly. We've had some of those conversations with other people before.
Yeah. And that's where we fit in. You can't go to a bank with that. And there's nothing wrong with the bank. Bank is not going to look at that. They don't understand that.
No.
Not what they do.
Mm-mm.
But that's what we do.
So what separates the businesses? Let's start helping give some, some tips, etc., to the companies listening to us. What separates the good companies from the great companies?
The good to great, and I would say somewhere between before you're even good, the one trait you have to have, in my opinion, is you have to have some humility. You have to know that you don't know everything, and you have to know what you don't know. Be comfortable with that. Be willing to ask for help. Be willing to accept help. The people that I see that are good and have all the opportunity in the world, but never capitalize on it, or worse, get hurt, are the ones that are afraid to be honest and open about what they know and what they don't know. Or they're fearful that they're going to look a certain way that's typically negative because of something that actually is true, meaning like, I don't know a lot about finance, and, I'm going to pretend I do because I'm going to look bad if I don't. Well, the reality is if you don't know anything about finance and you're not willing to seek help from it, then you're right. You're going to look bad because you're going to do something silly or that you don't need to do. But if you go in and the great ones know that what you don't know, you can say, hey, I'm really good at these things. I'm really bad at these things. The way I've fixed the bad things is I've worked with and hired, or I utilize these services, and here's what I don't know. So I'm really open to listening to anything that can help you understand how you can help me fill these problem areas. Those are the greatest opportunities. Those are the people I see that are really great or have the opportunity to be great. Now, the great companies that go from good to great are the ones that have that awareness. They build systems and processes that they can trust. They understand that they're not going to be able to do everything. There's a real pivot point between that $2-ish million range where you can be the entrepreneur that kind of does everything, and you can find comfort because you have your hands on just about everything. It's not big enough that you can't see things. To get any higher than that without hurting yourself, you have got to be able to trust people.
Yes.
And not just trust them to just figure it out. You have to trust them to follow the system and processes that you've put in place and that you teach and train to, and then allow them to help you and flourish in that system, and not micromanage, but manage the system, but allow them to flourish within the system, and then let them hire people, and you move people. And that's how you build a strong, great company with great people, great core values, that everyone's moving in the same direction, everyone understands what you're trying to accomplish, and that the systems and the rules you're going to follow within that. And that gives people the freedom to know what's good and bad, and what they can make decisions on and what they can't, because the same core principles and values that you put in place. That's what the greatest entrepreneurs I see have.
That's great. That actually flows right into we're reading as a team a book called 10X. I think it's 10X is easier than 2X. And it's talking about that 20% that you need to focus in on, and really that becomes the energy that you put into everything that you need to do to get to the next level, versus and give away the 80% that you don't need to have your hands in to the people that are good at that, right? And trust people to get it done, and don't pick it up, right? Focus on your 20%. So, and that's true. That's how you get to, you see where the mistakes are, you get to fine tune, you get to grow your company to the next level, and you can focus in on those pieces. So on the financial side of things, what are some of the challenges that they tend to run into when they don't understand how money works per se, right? What are some of the things you've seen some of those companies have to deal with? Have anybody defaulted on their loans before? Like, what happened in that?
Yeah.
What happened? Why would they have done that?
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely had people default on their loan. We've had people not repay their loans. I mean, in 11 years, we've probably seen it all. I was telling somebody yesterday I was talking to, and they're like, "Where did you get all this information from? How do you know?" I'm like, "Well, we've had, hundreds of clients that we've worked with and watched and completed thousands of projects at this point. And in addition to that, we also analyze probably 5, 6, 7 different businesses every week that we might not even have the ability to fund. And so you learn a lot across all those different businesses and watching how people do things and different things. And what we do, if someone defaults, they're accountable to the loan and they need to repay the loan. But if you're asking, like, why does someone default? Or typically it's really usually they fall outside of parameters of the systems that we've put in place to help them. They want to use the money for whatever they want to use it for. Or they, instead of letting the money come in from their customer and have it repay the loan like it's supposed to, they make a new decision that won't fit, and that creates a new problem. And usually those are problems that they never foresaw, because why would they? They didn't know. They're just trying to put out a problem right now.
Right. Trying to put out a fire or something.
And there was a trait between the good and great companies. The great companies, they don't live with a scarcity mindset, and they don't live like they're on fire. They live with an abundance mindset, and they are poised and thinking through, like, things are opportunities. They're not sitting there scared and fearful. They're sitting there, aware and opportunistic.
That sounds like the book we're reading. It talks about the want mindset versus the need mindset. Like, you don't function in that scarcity, and you function in the abundance mindset, which is a totally different frame that you live your life, or different filters that you live through. So that is great. And now, if they come to you, what do they need to have had in order, right? Paperwork is important. So what should they be keeping up with for them to even be evaluated in a positive light?
So the good news is we're not looking for anything that you shouldn't already have in your business. 'Cause, I mean, we've got, 100 of
Well, Scott, you never know. So you probably
Yes.
want to share what those are.
Yep. No, yeah. And so those things are what we're looking for is we have a basic one-page application, just who owns the business, who are the people. That's easy. Those are simple things. We've all done that. We look at 6 months bank statements for the business. We look at the last 2 tax returns that were filed for the business. We look at the internally prepared financials for the year prior and whatever the current year to date is. And then we look at the accounts receivable and accounts payable reports or whatever accounts receivable and accounts payable system that's being utilized. Like obviously accounts receivables, what your customers owe you, accounts payables, what you owe your vendors, right? And then the last thing we're looking for is what your contracts are or your purchase orders, the things that you're trying to consider to be funded by us.
Okay, easy
That's it.
enough. Well, the
Yep.
smaller companies, they may not have some of those pieces if they don't really have their accounting, their books in order, and hopefully they do. The larger companies, for sure, they definitely should have that in-house service where they are able to pull that type of documentation for you. So you mentioned earlier on about the bonding. And for construction, we know that you live and die by your bonding capacity. So how can a company increase their bonding?
Great question. So, and do you want me to kind of touch on that in terms of any size company or stick to like a certain size, like your first initial kind of bonding company, getting your first bonds and kind of growing from there?
Sure, you can kind of take us through that process. We have
Okay.
all sorts of listeners. Definitely like as they start growing, like how do you really, get your numbers up there?
Yeah. So being bonded, and I'm not a perfect expert on these levels, but in my experience, this is what I see.
Mhm.
Being bonded like 1 million or less, or even 500,000 and less, is going to be really relied upon, especially in government programs with some of the different systems like the SBA and whatnot. They're going to be looking at your personal credit, personal assets, personal value. They're going to look at the business too, but they can lean a little bit heavier on some of your personal credit history. You get over 1 million, 2 million, 5 million, $10 million bonding capacities, they're looking at the business and your personal,
Mhm.
but they're really looking at the business, meaning you
Mhm.
could have great personal credit and you could have great background and a small business that you're just starting and get a 250, maybe even a $500,000 SBA loan. But you're not going to get bonding capacity, SBA bonding program, but you're not going to get a $5 million bond if you have all those same things, but a poorly run business without the right financials, or you don't
Mhm.
have the right balance sheet to really support that. They don't carry over. So what I think is really necessary as you kind of grow early on, you have to make sure that you're actually doing profitable work. And I know that sounds like, oh yeah, okay, really good job, genius. Like Randy, so glad you had Scott tell us to do profitable work. But what I mean by that is you can bid it profitable, but it doesn't mean you're actually completing and executing and being paid profitably.
Yes, right.
And that's a key piece to know. And so how would you know that? Well, you want to know by putting your bid in, making sure you have the appropriate margin, not just markup, but margin. And that as you execute the work, the costs that you anticipated going into that job in your bid are actual. Did they actually pan out to be the actual costs? When you're paid the contract value, you can then say, okay, whereas I paid the exact amount I bid. Now you should be if you finish the project, but
Mhm.
there might be change orders. Maybe you had positive or minus change orders. Some of those might enhance your profitability, or they might actually hurt your profitability.
Right. Mhm.
And then look at those things afterwards and say, okay, you know what? Yeah, I bid and had an 18% margin and I completed the work and was paid and I had a 15% margin. Okay, cool. Or I had a 22% margin. I was able to do this quicker than I thought, those type of things. And then those companies, the next piece is so you know your numbers, you analyze those numbers, you know what your overhead costs are, and you're allocating those overhead costs to the right projects. Because what people usually forget, and you can't just say, oh, I had 10% for profit and 10% for overhead, because you don't know if your overhead actually is 20%. The people that are not on your project, but on your payroll, they got to be allocated somewhere. The insurances, the debt service, the equipment payments, those type of rent, mortgages, they all have to be allocated somewhere. And if you have $1 million in overhead, then and you add 10% to every project, well, then I hope you got $10 million worth of work, right? If you have $400,000 in overhead, I hope you have $4 million worth of work that you execute profitably. And so the key thing is knowing the numbers. The second thing is, as you execute that work, you have to be very disciplined with a philosophy called delayed gratification. Okay. And delayed gratification is you're going to get paid years after you think you should get paid. Okay. Let that business pull whatever money you need out to live a very modest lifestyle, and let that business eat. Let that business flourish. Let that money sit on your balance sheet. Let it sit there, because no, you cannot take all the money out of your business. The biggest mistake I see small business owners make is they try to limit their taxability by just taking money out, or putting cost expenses to it, or buying all this extra equipment, doing things that might be prudent, but you have to know that you have to build your balance sheet and the equity and the retained earnings in your business to have the bonding capacity. And then on top of that, you also need to have cash, because they're going to give you usually 10 or 20 times your cash value, depending on what kind of bonding program you're in. And it's those key things: your profitability, particularly your retained earnings, and the cash you have on hand, or access to cash, like a line of credit can be utilized for that. Get the bonding capacity you need. But you're never going to get a line of credit if you don't have the retained earnings and the profit in the business. And so what does that look like? If you make $500,000 a year in the business, take out 100, keep 400 in, don't take out 400 and keep 100 in, and do that for a few years. Put a couple $1,000,000 on your balance sheet 3, 4, 5 years in. Again, I'm not telling you not to live, and I'm not telling you not to put yourself on the payroll. I'm just saying your business makes $500,000-$600,000 a year, and you're paying taxes on that. I know what phantom incomes looks like too. I'm aware of all that. Pay your taxes on it, but don't take it personally, and leave that money in the business to let yourself get to a certain sustained level that'll help you get your bonding capacity, financing. Everything gets easier. It's hard for the first few, and then you build those balance sheets up, and all of a sudden lots of things get easier.
And that's definitely great information. And that's definitely a difference between the small versus those medium-sized companies that's figured it out, right? And they're really they've picked up steam in their momentum and their finances, and they are really blowing and going, and able to keep adding to their balance sheet, and in return keep adding and increasing their bonding capacity. So you got to get there. You got to pay your dues to get there, right?
Yeah.
So that's a great mindset. Go ahead.
You brought a great point up to there that made me think of that. I think very often I see this a lot in government contracting, and I don't know why it's it's in all businesses, but particularly in government contracting, they're so focused. Business owners seem to be so focused on top line revenue. Oh, I got to get to 10 million. I got to get to 15 million. I got to get 20 million. I'm telling you right now, as a guy who sees a lot of financials and a lot of businesses, most companies that you think are profitable because they're a $20-30 million business are not.
Oh, let's talk about that.
Okay, they're not. And actually, if you don't do the things that you and I are talking about here, when you're a $2-3 million company, like putting your accounting in place, putting your systems in place, I promise you, when you start piling revenue on top of that, you're not going to keep any of it, man. It's not good. You're just going to have a bigger problem, a bigger headache, and you're going to have this wild stallion of a horse that you're trying to ride. Instead, when you had the chance to tame the pony, you didn't tame the pony. Now you got this wild stallion running 100 miles an hour that is completely out of control. So don't assume that the people that have more revenue than you are doing anything right. They're not, just because they have that revenue. Revenue is not an indicator of a good business by any stretch of means at all. And you might be able to run a $5 million business and make a lot more money than you can a $20 million business. And the reason is that difference between 5 and 20, that whole business shakes differently. It vibrates differently. You have to have different skills and talents and people and systems and processes in order to push $20 million of revenue and projects and opportunity, whatever it is you may do through your business. And if you don't have good systems in place, that extra $15 million of revenue can actually operate at a loss, where the first $5 million of revenue might operate at a profit.
That is a great point. In one of the interviews that I did recently, one of the accountants, that's something that they talked about is because they focus on middle market. And so they see when those companies transition out of small, right, as the NACS code defines it, for those who's new, construction, and NACS goes if you're doing $45 million a year on average over 5 years, right? You can stay small, 45 or less. You jump over, you're large, whether you like it or not. But one of the things they talk about is they have to help these companies as they transition to really shore up their accounting systems, their processes, like everything that encapsulates for the business of a larger company, although you're still small, because it's a different animal. As soon as you switch, it's different. The compliance issues, right? The government is looking a little bit deeper now, right? And so forth. So it really does behoove those companies as they are growing to really set up the sure foundation. So they're not in that space when they grow, if they grow outside of that, small business set aside.
That's right.
So hopefully you guys hear us. Set up your business structure as you're growing, so that way you've created the discipline to know how to grow the business. So one of the things I wanted to ask about, because you mentioned like overhead costs, and that was actually one of the questions I wanted to ask you. How do companies deal with their overhead, high overhead, right? To help them, one, price their bids correctly, and two, maybe help decrease it so they can increase profit margins, right? So how do you help? What advice would you give on that?
I think I understand what you're asking because I'm familiar with the problem. Like your overhead's a lot. This is what it costs to run my business. Question, or the next comment that usually follows that is, look, this is what this price of work that's being awarded at. No problem. I get it. So the second comment is true. The first comment's not. That's what I tell people. Your overhead is your overhead, but it doesn't need to be that. The price is set by the customer's supply and demand, what you bid, what you don't, right? So that's the beauty of the world we live in, is it, it's capitalism. You provide bids, people bid it, and they award it to you, right? And in the government world, it's usually low bid, right? Sometimes it's low bid work. Well, you have to realize who you're competing with. If they bid something at $250,000 and your margin's 11%, and they bid something at $240,000 and win, it doesn't mean that, oh man, they must be losing money. Mine's 11%. Doesn't mean they're at 11%. They might be bidding it at 240 and be at 22% margin. And what I think the misconception is, everybody knows their own business really well, but they don't necessarily think about scalability. A company that's at $20 million, like you and I talked about a minute ago, that's operating efficiently. Well, when they have their business in place, that extra $15 million of work that I was giving that example on, they might be able to do that at a very low cost compared to the first 5 million, as opposed to the company that is reversed. And so what I think companies need to look at from an overhead perspective is you have to look at what you actually need. You can't just add people to problems. If you're looking down your payroll and you have a lot of family members on there, you might want to consider, are they really the people that are best suited for my position? A CPA. Well, just because one of my cousins is a CPA doesn't mean they're the right CPA for my business. If they don't understand construction and I'm a construction firm, then that's not the best CPA to hire. And accountants, for example, a lot of small business owners think of accountants or accounting firms to do their taxes. And that's the exact opposite way you should think about it. An accounting firm should help you set up your financial infrastructure to do the things that you and I are talking about. And then they also happen to pay your taxes. But you really need to take a good, hard look at your overhead. And the best way to do that, in my opinion, Randy, is take the actual things that you spend your money on. Go through the last 10 months and write down every single dollar that you've spent. Categorize it to a project or categorize it as overhead. And so once you understand what your total overhead is, you then can quickly realize what your overhead allocation needs to be to every job. And so that example you and I were talking about, if you spend $500,000 a year on overhead,
Mhm.
rent, debt service payments, admin, people in the office, people that are not out working. Okay.
Right.
Even if sometimes you go to the project and you want to allocate yourself to that, like you're not overhead unless you're actually filling the role of a project
Mhm.
manager. And so, and so then you take that number, and if you anticipate doing $5 million worth of work that year and you spend $500,000 on overhead, well, then you have 10% of your bid is overhead. You need to look hard at those numbers, because if you're only doing $2 million worth of work, you can't have $500,000 of overhead. And if you do that, then you
Right.
better be running a business that has 50% margins. That's the
Mhm.
difference. So you need to know what your margin is. And again, I'm giving construction examples because
Okay,
most
Scott,
construction
let
businesses.
me interrupt you for a quick second. You've let's for the audience, you've used the word margin a lot. So define margin.
Margin is the price you are paid, so your contract price or your purchase price, less all of your project related costs. That's your margin. Now, let me give you an example. Let's just use round numbers and say $1 million job,
Mhm.
okay? And you want to have a 20% margin. So you take your costs, let's say your costs are $800,000,
Right.
and you mark them up 10% for profit and 10% for
Overhead.
overhead.
Yeah.
So what is 20% of $800,000? Yeah, 160,000. Okay.
Mhm.
So then you put in a bid for 800 of costs plus 160 is a
960.
$960,000 contract, right?
Mhm.
Okay. If you take 960 and subtract 800, you're going to get $160,000 of margin. That is not 20%. So the
Mhm.
difference between margin and markup is really important, especially in construction, because if there's a thing called retainage where they hold back retainage on you,
Mhm.
they're holding back 10% of your contract value. And if they hold back 10% of $960,000,
Mhm.
you now have 160 minus 96,000. You now are going to end up with only $64,000 of free cash flow, which is less than the 200 again that you're thinking. So what's really important to look at is making sure you're calculating the difference between margin and markup. If you're intending to make $200,000, you can't mark up your cost. You have to take your cost and then divide that by the amount of margin that you want to make. So if you're trying to make 20%, you need to take your cost, and your cost therefore needs to be 80% of your bid.
Mm.
You would take your cost and divide it by 80%. If you want your margin to be 15%, you need to take your cost and divide it by 85%. And that will give you the total contract you should be putting in. Because a lot of companies think they're making 200 grand because they've added 10. They think they're making 20% because they've added 10 and 10,
And
but you're not making 20% of the contract value. And in the world we all live in, everything works off of the contract, purchase order, service agreement value, and works down. But if you're building it from your bottom up, you're going to lose, in the example we just calculated, almost a little more than 3%. And you want to make sure that
yeah.
you are looking at your overhead. So back to your original question, you want to
Mhm.
look at your overhead and make sure you're allocating that properly to a job. So if you know that you have a 10% or 11% overhead cost, and you're bidding a job at, you have cost in the job of $900,000, for
Mhm.
example, you want to add 11% to that. Okay. So you take 900 and add 11%. So now you've added your 90 some $1,000. Now you add your margin onto that, and now you can actually get a real margin. Now, the next thing someone would say, well, that sounds great, Scott, but I'm not going to win any jobs.
Right.
And
Right.
that gets back to your point. Now you need to look at your costs. You need to look at your
Mhm.
efficiencies. You need to look at the ability to do the work. If you're trying to do work in a 17% margin environment, that's just what the contracts are typically awarded at. You have to be honest with yourself. Can you actually do that work? You have to say no, or you might need to bid 5 times the amount of projects that everyone else does, because your costs are your costs. You have to really scrutinize those costs, be conscious of when you add those dollars. You can't just hire people to put out a problem. Most problems can be cured by systems and processes, not people. It's systems and processes first, people to run the system and process. Oftentimes people get frantic. Oh my God, I'm growing so much. I just need to hire somebody. And you hire them and you're like, whew, problem gone. And now you got this new person there to fix this problem. Right. And that's how your overhead gets so high before you realize that it's actually the part that's hurting you the most. Did I answer your question about overhead and margin?
Absolutely. That was a great explanation. Love the breakdown, because I think the audience can relate. They can sit there and figure it out themselves now with their own scenarios, right?
Yeah.
So that should definitely be helpful. Well, I know we're coming up on the hour, but I want to give you an opportunity to talk about your book that you launched last year. And let's see, I know the book is called The Big Book of Cash Flow. Let's talk about your book. Why'd you?
All right. So I wrote the book because, in the spirit I was telling you when we first started in 2020, I realized there's a lot of these stigmas and conversations that are like normal and routine for many people and many businesses, but sometimes they're also equally not normal and not routine. And not only that, but you kind of feel stupid if you ask some of these questions. Like, what is the difference between margin or markup? Oh my gosh. And the last thing you want to do is raise your hand and be like, can you tell me what margin means? And so I've learned that over talking to so many business owners, but it's not a stupid question. So I said, okay, well, you can keep telling people there's no stupid questions and people still just don't ask them.
Right.
Or I could create a book that, in my opinion, answers 90% of the things you really want to know that I've heard people ask when they're comfortable with me or comfortable with our team, that everyone probably has. And I know a lot of people have the same questions, and how to go figure it out and what are the solutions, and do it in a way that isn't some storytelling book about all these fancy words and you still don't understand. It was like practical solutions. So like, what is margin? That example that I just gave you is exactly the way I explain margin and markup in the book.
Awesome.
What are the things I need to know? When I go meet with my accountant, how do I know which accountant I want to hire? What questions do I ask him? What do those questions mean? What is a financial infrastructure? That sounds so cool, Scott, but what does that mean? Well, when you say recognize revenue, what do you mean recognize revenue? Well, does WIP go on my accounts receivable? Does it go on my WIP report? What's the difference between WIP and accounts receivable? Where should I put retainage on my financials? And just all those basic buzzwords that a lot of finance people, bankers, investment bankers try to use all these fancy words, and half those words just mean the same simple thing. Like, it's still math. Like, it's really the most simple math equation. Like, money comes in, that's a plus sign.
Right.
There's a whole bunch of subtraction signs.
Debits and credits.
And there's an equals at the end.
Yeah.
Like, it's really that simple, but there's a lot of noise in between. And so the book was my way to put 90 pages with charts and graphs and and some chapters together to give everybody kind of like cash flow for dummies, like, here's all the easy basic questions. Here's the most simple stuff. Every one of these questions, I used to sit there scared to ask and scared to raise my hand. And so I put them in the book and answer them for everyone. And so that you can quickly go to something that you can read in like 2 sittings and give you everything you need to know that can make you feel comfortable. And everything else that's not in that book, it's more than welcome. You're more than free to ask that question to anyone. You should never feel worried about asking those questions, and find your accountant, whoever. And that's why I wrote the book.
Well, I appreciate your time. Thank you, Scott. We could probably keep going, and there's so much more that you can share from all of your experiences and what you've learned along the way. So thank you so much for coming on today and spending an hour with us. I'm sure our audience has gained a lot of education, right? And that's the most important part for us. So do you have any closing words or anything that we might not have talked about that you said, they really need to know this?
Yeah, no, I think you asked me some great questions. We touched on a lot. The one thing I would tell folks is all of these things you and I have talked about, you can find them on our YouTube channel, Mobilization Funding. There's lots of little snippets of what's the difference between margin and markup. And I have a little 2-minute video on it. What's the importance of cash flow, and what's the difference between cash flow and profit? And there's a little 3-minute, 4-minute video on it. And so I would say go to our YouTube channel, click subscribe. We put new content on there every day.
Mhm.
They are not advertisements for mobilization funding. It is just pure content and education that is around the things that you and I have talked about today. We also have a podcast called Construction MFers where we bring on bonding agents,
Wonderful.
government-related contractors who are talking about their journey. It could also be someone talking about fringe benefits and the Davis-Bacon Wage Act, or an attorney that just focused on OSHA and what your rights are. All kinds of great content you can access and trust from good-hearted folks just like you guys at GovCon. And so I would tell people to use that information, use those tools. Those are the only things that I would add. And follow me on LinkedIn. We're on there too. I'd love to connect with you guys.
Oh, wonderful. Well, thank you so much again and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, Randy.